He entered her tent by mistake, and the Apache woman decreed, "Now you are my husband, rancher." Every morning before the sun had fully risen, he would saddle his horse and ride out to check on the cattle, the fences, and the vast stretches of land that had been in his family for generations. There was a certain comfort in the routine, a rhythm that connected him to the earth and to the animals that depended on him. But even the most disciplined man sometimes craved a little adventure beyond the familiar paths. On this particular day, John decided to explore a part of the land he had never visited before. He had noticed a winding trail along the edge of the property that disappeared into a cluster of rocks and sparse trees. The trail looked old and rarely used. Curious, he led his horse forward, the soft sound of hooves on dry earth mixing with the gentle whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. He felt a strange excitement, a thrill that came from stepping into unknown territory. The trail narrowed as he went deeper into the landscape. Shadows stretched long in the late afternoon sunlight, and the air was warmer than he expected. Birds flitted from tree to tree, and occasionally he heard the distant sound of running water. It was peaceful, almost magical, and John allowed himself to forget the clock, to let the moment fully soak in. He guided his horse carefully over uneven rocks and through sandy patches, thinking about nothing more than the beauty of the land. As the trail opened into a small clearing, John spotted something unusual. A large tent stood at the center, its fabric stretching taut in the breeze. It was unlike anything he had seen on his ranch. The colors were muted, mostly earth tones, and the structure looked sturdy yet simple. He paused, curiosity urging him forward. From a distance, he assumed it might be abandoned or perhaps used seasonally by travelers passing through. He had no reason to believe it belonged to anyone at that moment. John approached cautiously, his horse moving slowly over the soft ground. The tent smelled faintly of herbs and wood smoke, a scent that made him feel both cautious and oddly at home. He looked around for signs of life, but the clearing seemed empty. He convinced himself it was safe and stepped closer. Perhaps, he thought, he could find some useful items or a place to rest for a while before heading back to the main ranch. As he reached the entrance, John noticed that the flap of the tent was slightly open. He hesitated, remembering the stories his father used to tell him about respecting other people's spaces. But curiosity, that old friend, had a stronger pull today. He nudged the flap and stepped inside. The inside of the tent was simple but well kept. There were mats on the floor, some clay pots, and a small fire pit with ashes that had long since cooled. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the fabric, casting warm patterns on the walls. John was so absorbed in observing the details that he did not immediately notice movement. Suddenly, a voice spoke from the corner. "Who are you and why are you here?" John froze. The voice was calm but firm, carrying a strength he had not expected. Slowly, he turned and saw her. Nayeli, an Apache woman, stood there, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and authority. She was not angry, but there was no mistaking the power in her gaze. John realized instantly that he had made a mistake. I'm sorry," John stammered, stepping back instinctively. "I thought this place was abandoned. I didn't mean to." Nayeli's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "You entered my home without permission. That is not a small thing." John nodded, feeling a flush of embarrassment. He had never felt so clearly the weight of someone else's presence. He could see that this was not just a simple tent. It was a home, a carefully maintained space that held personal meaning. He felt a strange mix of fear, respect, and awe. I was exploring the land," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't see your tent from the trail. I meant no harm." Nayeli studied him for a moment. Then, in a calm and deliberate voice, she said something that would change the course of his life. "Now you are my husband, rancher." John blinked. The words seemed impossible. He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. He had heard of customs and traditions from other communities, but this declaration carried a seriousness that left him speechless. He looked at her, trying to read her expression, to understand whether she was joking, but her eyes told him she was completely sincere. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. John's mind raced. He thought about his life on the ranch, his family, and the orderly routine that had shaped him. Now everything felt uncertain, as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. And yet, amid the confusion, there was something compelling about her presence. Nayeli moved with confidence and grace, and John could feel the strength of her character in the way she held herself. Finally, he managed to find his voice. I don't understand," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm just a rancher. I don't know the ways of your people." Nayeli did not flinch. "Then you will learn," she said simply. "Life has a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways. You are here now, and you must accept what has begun." John felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. He realized that this moment was more than just an accident. It was a turning point. He could leave, turn back to the familiar safety of his ranch, or he could stay and step into a world that was entirely new. He had always been adventurous, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet observation. Nayeli did not press him further, but her presence was commanding. John noticed the small details of her home, the way she had organized her belongings, the care she had taken with her cooking area, and the simple decorations that reflected her heritage. Every detail spoke of a life lived with intention and respect for the land and her people. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the clearing, John realized that he was no longer just a visitor. He was standing at the threshold of a life he could not have imagined, in a place where every choice carried weight and every action had meaning. He felt both nervous and exhilarated, aware that one step forward could change everything. By the time night fell, John was sitting outside the tent, his horse tethered nearby. The stars sparkled overhead, and the desert was quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind through the shrubs. He thought about his family, his ranch, and the life he had always known. But now, the possibilities seemed endless. He wondered what it would be like to learn from Nayeli, to understand her world and perhaps, in time, to earn her trust and respect. That night, as he lay under the open sky, John understood something important. Life could change in an instant, and sometimes, mistakes could lead to the most unexpected and meaningful experiences. He did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time in his life, he felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be, even if it had begun by stepping into a tent by mistake. The next morning, John awoke before the sun had risen. The sky was painted in soft pink and orange hues, and the desert air was cool and refreshing. He sat quietly outside the tent, watching the world come alive. Birds chirped in the distance, and the faint rustle of the wind through the brush was almost soothing. Yet he could not stop thinking about what had happened the day before. Nayeli's words echoed in his mind. "Now you are my husband, rancher." The statement seemed impossible, unbelievable, and yet it carried a weight he could not ignore. He had spent all his life working on the ranch, where rules and routines were clear, where a man's life was defined by his labor and his family. But here, in this remote clearing, everything he thought he knew about life felt uncertain. He had accidentally entered Nayeli's tent, and that mistake had changed the course of his life. He was nervous about what would happen next. He had never interacted closely with someone from a different culture before, and he wondered how he could possibly navigate the traditions and expectations she had set before him. As he pondered these thoughts, he noticed Nayeli emerging from the tent. She moved gracefully, her posture proud yet calm, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she had already decided how the day would unfold. She carried a small basket filled with herbs and food, and she approached the small fire pit with a purpose that reminded John of how skilled she was at managing her life in the wilderness. There was no fear in her presence, only confidence and a quiet authority that John could not help but admire. "Good morning," John said, keeping his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt. "I didn't mean to intrude yesterday. Naomi held up a hand gently, stopping him from speaking further. "Yesterday is gone. What matters is what comes next," she said. Her words were simple but carried a deeper meaning that John was only beginning to understand. "You are here now. You will learn my ways and I will learn yours. This is how we begin." John nodded slowly. He realized that resistance would do nothing. He could either run back to his ranch, to the familiar, predictable life he had always known, or he could accept the challenge and step into a world completely different from his own. Something inside him told him that adventure and growth lay in the latter choice. Naomi began the day with practical tasks. She showed John how to gather water from a nearby stream, how to identify edible plants, and how to prepare a simple meal using only the ingredients she had brought with her. John listened carefully, trying to absorb every detail. He had grown up working with animals and the land, but this knowledge was new to him, intimate, practical, and rooted in survival and respect for nature. Each instruction she gave was filled with subtle lessons about patience, awareness, and mindfulness. At first, John fumbled. He struggled to carry water without spilling, to chop vegetables in the way Naomi instructed, and to build a small fire strong enough to cook without wasting fuel. Naomi observed quietly, correcting him gently when necessary but never showing frustration. She moved with efficiency, yet there was a calmness in her demeanor that made John feel he could ask questions and make mistakes without judgment. Slowly, he began to learn, not just the tasks, but the rhythm of her life. By midday, John noticed that his hands were sore and his body tired, yet there was a sense of satisfaction he had not felt in a long time. On the ranch, his labor was routine, predictable, and often solitary. Here, every action mattered. Every choice had an immediate effect, and he felt a connection to the world around him that was both challenging and rewarding. He realized that learning from Naomi was not just about acquiring skills, it was about understanding a different way of seeing the world. During a brief break, John sat across from Naomi, sharing a small meal she had prepared. The air was warm and the desert sun shone gently upon them. John noticed the way she looked at him, not with suspicion, but with a quiet expectation, as if she was measuring his willingness to adapt and respect her life. He realized that this was more than a simple declaration of marriage. Naomi's words carried responsibility, trust, and a shared commitment to live together in harmony. "You will need to understand my people's traditions," Naomi said, breaking the silence. "Not because I demand it, but because life is easier when we respect each other's ways. There is knowledge here that has been passed down for generations. You may find it strange at first, but it will guide you." John listened carefully. He had always believed in learning from experience, but this was different. This knowledge was living, tied to people, land, and history. He could feel the weight of generations in her words, and he felt humbled by the opportunity to be included in something so ancient and meaningful. The afternoon brought more lessons. Naomi taught John how to track small animals, not to hunt recklessly but to understand movement and behavior. She showed him how to identify animal tracks in the sand, how to find signs of water, and how to read the wind and the position of the sun to navigate the desert. John was amazed at her skill and patience. He realized that everything she did was intentional, designed to maintain balance between humans and nature. As they worked side by side, John began to notice small details about Naomi's character. She was patient, observant, and remarkably resilient. She had a quiet sense of humor that appeared in small smiles or subtle comments, and John found himself smiling more often than he had in months. There was a rhythm to her life that drew him in, a sense of order and respect that he had never experienced in such intensity before. By late afternoon, the sun began to dip behind the distant hills, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. John and Nayeli had finished their tasks and sat together outside the tent. John reflected on the day, amazed at how much he had learned and how quickly the fear and tension of the previous day had faded. He realized that he was beginning to feel comfortable in this new space, not because it was easy, but because he had started to understand and respect the way Nayeli lived. "You are learning quickly," Nayeli said, her voice calm but approving. "That is good. But learning is only part of life. You must also observe, listen, and remember. That is how you truly become part of this place." John nodded, feeling a sense of pride mixed with humility. He had always thought of himself as capable and strong, but he understood now that strength was not only measured in physical skill. It was measured in the ability to adapt, to listen, and to respect the world and people around him. He realized that Nayeli was teaching him not only practical skills, but also a philosophy of life. As night approached, Nayeli lit a small fire outside the tent. The stars appeared one by one, scattered across the dark sky. The desert was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional whisper of wind. John felt a sense of peace he had not known before. He thought about his ranch, his family, and his old life, but he also realized that he was beginning to belong in this new place. The accidental entry into Nayeli's tent had led him here, and he could feel that something meaningful was beginning to grow. That evening, as they sat together, Nayeli shared stories of her childhood and her people. John listened intently, fascinated by the tales of courage, wisdom, and connection to the land. He realized that he was not only learning skills, but also understanding a worldview that was deeply connected to nature and community. He felt honored to be included in these stories, aware that trust and respect were being built between them. Before sleep, Nayeli looked at John and said softly, "Tomorrow will bring more work, more lessons. You may feel tired, confused, or challenged. That is normal. But remember, this is how life teaches those who are willing to learn." John lay under the open sky, staring at the stars. He reflected on the events of the day, amazed at how quickly his life had changed. He had entered a tent by mistake, but now he found himself on the threshold of a journey he could never have imagined. Fear and uncertainty had been replaced by curiosity, respect, and a quiet excitement about what the future would hold. He realized that life was not just about routines and predictability. Sometimes it was about courage, openness, and the willingness to step into the unknown. Nayeli had shown him that knowledge, trust, and connection were far more valuable than any skill he had learned on the ranch. And in that moment, John understood that he had begun a journey that would not only teach him about survival, but also about life, respect, and the bonds that can form when two very different worlds meet. The next morning, John woke up feeling more confident than the previous day. The sky was painted with soft shades of dawn, and the air carried the fresh scent of desert plants. He had begun to feel a sense of belonging in this unfamiliar world, even though just a few days ago it had seemed so strange and daunting. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb Nayeli, who was already awake and preparing for the day. Nayeli greeted him with a calm smile, as if she had expected him to rise early. "Today, we begin real work," she said, her tone gentle but firm. John knew from experience that when Nayeli spoke this way, it meant the day would be full of learning, challenges, and lessons he could not afford to ignore. The first task of the day involved the small garden Nayeli maintained near the edge of the clearing. She showed John how to tend the soil, plant seeds in neat rows, and water them efficiently. John realized that gardening was more than just planting crops. It was an art that required patience, observation, and care. Nayeli explained which plants were best for food, which could be used for medicine, and how to keep the garden healthy without wasting resources. John struggled at first. His hands were not used to the careful, precise movements required for planting seeds evenly. He made mistakes, dropping seeds in the wrong rows and spilling water over the soil. Nayeli watched quietly, offering small corrections and guidance. She never scolded him. Instead, she encouraged him gently. John began to understand that her teaching method was not about perfection, but about understanding, observation, and learning through experience. As the morning passed, John noticed a change in himself. He felt more connected to the earth and more aware of the small details around him. He noticed the way the sunlight shifted through the trees, how the wind carried subtle scents, and how the soil reacted under his hands. He began to understand that living in harmony with the land required attention, respect, and mindfulness. Nayeli had taught him that every action had meaning, and that understanding those meanings was as important as any physical skill. After tending the garden, Nayeli led John to a nearby creek. The water was clear and cool, flowing gently over smooth stones. She showed him how to catch small fish using traditional methods, not to harm the environment but to provide food responsibly. John was amazed at her skill. She moved with such precision and care, as if every motion was guided by generations of knowledge and experience. Watching her, he felt a mix of admiration and humility. He realized that he had much to learn, not only about survival but about a way of life that valued balance and respect. While John tried to follow her instructions, he found that catching fish was much harder than he had expected. The creek was shallow, and the fish were quick. He slipped and splashed water over himself, laughing despite his frustration. Nayeli chuckled softly at his mistakes, but she never made him feel foolish. Instead, she offered guidance with patience and clarity. Slowly, John began to succeed, catching a few fish and feeling a sense of accomplishment. The simple act of learning together strengthened the bond between them, and he realized that trust and cooperation were becoming central to their growing relationship. By midday, they returned to the clearing, carrying the fish and preparing a meal together. John was amazed at how efficiently Nayeli worked, using only a few simple tools and ingredients to create something nourishing and satisfying. She taught him how to clean the fish, prepare them with herbs, and cook them over the fire. John tried to follow her instructions carefully, and though his first attempts were clumsy, Nayeli praised his efforts. "You are learning quickly," she said, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "But remember, learning is not just about doing tasks correctly. It is about understanding why and how each step matters. That is what makes knowledge last." John nodded, absorbing the lesson. He realized that life with Nayeli was different from his life on the ranch. On the ranch, he had learned to work hard, but much of it had been routine and predictable. Here, every task required attention, thought, and intention. He began to see that the skills he was gaining were more than practical. They were shaping the way he thought, acted, and connected with the world around him. After their meal, Nayeli suggested they take a walk to explore the surrounding area. John agreed eagerly. As they walked, she pointed out different plants, explained their uses, and shared stories of her people. John listened with fascination, realizing that every detail of the landscape had meaning and purpose. He began to see the desert not as empty or harsh, but as full of life, knowledge, and opportunities for learning. During the walk, Nayeli taught John about tracking animals. She showed him how to read footprints in the sand, identify broken branches, and notice subtle changes in the environment. John was impressed by her keen observation and patience. At first, he struggled to notice the small details, but Nayeli guided him carefully, helping him to see what he had missed. Slowly, he began to develop a sense of awareness that he had never experienced before. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they returned to the clearing. John was tired but satisfied, filled with a sense of accomplishment he had not felt in a long time. He realized that he was learning not only practical skills, but also values, patience, respect, and mindfulness. He had begun to understand that life with Nayeli was about harmony, balance, and partnership, and he felt grateful for the opportunity to learn from her. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Nayeli shared more stories of her childhood and her people. John listened intently, captivated by the richness of her culture. She spoke of traditions, of respect for nature, and of the importance of community. John felt honored to hear these stories and began to understand that being part of Nayeli's life meant more than just learning tasks. It meant understanding a worldview rooted in respect, balance, and wisdom. "You are different from others who come here," Nayeli said softly. "You are willing to learn, to listen, and to respect. That is why you are here and why this life is possible for you. Do not forget that learning is a journey, not a task to complete." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that his presence in her life was not just an accident. It was the start of a journey that would change him deeply. He thought about the life he had left behind, the ranch, and the predictable routines, and he understood that what lay ahead was far more meaningful. As night fell, they prepared for rest. John lay under the open sky, looking at the stars that shimmered above the desert. The cool night air carried the scent of sage and earth, and he felt a sense of peace he had not known before. He reflected on the day, amazed at how much he had learned, how much he had grown, and how much he still had to discover. He thought about Nayeli, her strength, patience, and wisdom. He realized that she had already begun to teach him lessons that went beyond survival, lessons about life, trust, and respect. He felt a growing admiration for her, and an understanding that their lives were becoming intertwined in a way that was deeper than either of them had anticipated. John understood something important that night. Life was not just about work, routines, or even survival. It was about connection, connection to the land, to knowledge, and to the people who shared it. He felt fortunate that he had been given the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to experience a life so different from the one he had always known. Before sleep, Nayeli spoke again, her voice calm in the quiet night. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new lessons. Do not fear them. Life is full of surprises, and those who embrace them with patience and respect will find their path." John listened carefully, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that he had come a long way since the day he had accidentally entered her tent. What had seemed like a mistake now felt like the first step on a journey that would shape the rest of his life. He closed his eyes, feeling gratitude, curiosity, and a quiet excitement for what tomorrow would bring. The days that followed were different from anything John had experienced before. Life in the clearing with Nayeli was no longer simply about learning tasks or surviving in the desert. It had become about understanding a rhythm, a way of life that blended respect, patience, and trust. John began to feel that he was no longer merely a visitor. He was becoming part of this small world, part of the harmony that Nayeli had carefully cultivated. One morning, Nayeli suggested they explore a new area near the hills. The land there was more rugged and rocky, with small streams winding through patches of greenery. John agreed eagerly, eager to test the skills he had learned over the past days. As they walked, Nayeli taught him how to navigate difficult terrain, how to find solid footing, and how to use the patterns of the sun and stars to understand direction. John realized that every movement, every observation, had a purpose. During their exploration, Nayeli shared more about the history of her people. She spoke of the lessons her elders had taught her, of the importance of community, and of the way each action, no matter how small, could affect others. John listened carefully, fascinated by the depth of wisdom in her words. He began to understand that her way of life was built on knowledge passed down through generations, a knowledge that valued harmony with nature, respect for others, and the patience to observe and learn. As they rested beside a small stream, John attempted to catch fish using the techniques Naeli had shown him. At first he struggled, as he had in the earlier days. But now he was more patient, more observant, and more focused. Slowly he began to succeed, catching a few small fish and feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Naeli smiled at his progress, her expression one of quiet pride. "You are learning not only the skill but the thought behind it," she said. "That is important. Life is more than doing, it is understanding." John felt a warmth in her words. He realized that their relationship had grown beyond teacher and student. There was now a mutual respect and understanding, a silent acknowledgement that they were learning from each other. He admired her intelligence, her skill, and her calm authority. Naeli, in turn, seemed to recognize his willingness to listen, to adapt, and to respect her ways. The bond between them was slowly growing, unspoken but undeniable. Returning to the clearing, they worked together to repair parts of the small shelter near the tent. John had learned to manage tools, to observe the structure carefully, and to use his hands with precision. Naeli guided him gently, showing where adjustments were needed and explaining the reasoning behind each action. John began to appreciate the care she put into every detail, the thoughtfulness that made her home both functional and welcoming. As they worked, John noticed that he had begun to anticipate Naeli's instructions. He no longer needed to be corrected as often. He had started to understand not only what to do, but why it mattered. He realized that he was becoming more than just a visitor learning skills. He was becoming a partner, someone who could contribute meaningfully to the life they were building together. In the evening, after the day's work, they shared a meal together. Naeli prepared it with the same care she always did, but John now took part actively, helping to gather ingredients and prepare food. The act of working together felt natural, comforting, and deeply satisfying. John began to see that their partnership was not just about survival, it was about connection, cooperation, and mutual respect. After the meal, they sat by the fire, watching the stars appear in the night sky. The desert was quiet, serene, and beautiful. John reflected on how far he had come since the day he had entered the tent by mistake. What had started as an awkward encounter had grown into something meaningful. He felt gratitude for Naeli's patience, wisdom, and guidance, and he recognized that the bond forming between them was rare and precious. "You have changed since the first day," Naeli said softly, breaking the silence. "You are more aware, more patient, and more thoughtful. That is good. It shows that you are ready for more than just the tasks of survival. You are learning to live in harmony with the world around you." John felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that he had learned not only practical skills, but also lessons about life, patience, and respect. He understood that Naeli had taught him more than he could have imagined, and he felt a growing admiration for her strength, wisdom, and kindness. Over the following days, their lives became a balance of work, learning, and shared moments. John continued to practice the skills Naeli had taught him: gardening, tracking, preparing food, and navigating the land. But he also learned to observe, to anticipate, and to understand the reasoning behind each action. He realized that life with Naeli required attention not only to tasks, but to the feelings, needs, and perspectives of others. One afternoon, they sat together by the creek, sharing stories of their pasts. John spoke of the ranch, of his family, and of the life he had known. Naeli shared more about her people, her childhood, and the lessons she had learned. John listened intently, fascinated by the depth of her experiences and the wisdom in her words. He felt that every story, every shared moment, brought them closer together. During this time, John also began to notice subtle ways in which their partnership was growing. They anticipated each other's actions, communicated with gestures and expressions, and shared small jokes and smiles. The connection between them was quiet but strong, built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. John realized that he was beginning to feel at home in this new world, and that he had Naeli to thank for opening his eyes to it. One day, while gathering herbs near the edge of the clearing, John slipped on a rock and fell into a small patch of mud. He laughed at himself, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and amusement. Naeli came to his side, helping him up and brushing the mud from his clothes. They both laughed, and in that moment John felt a deep sense of comfort and ease. He realized that life with Naeli was not only about learning and work, it was also about shared experiences, laughter, and connection. As the weeks passed, John's confidence grew. He became more skilled in the tasks Naeli taught him, more aware of the land, and more attuned to the rhythm of life in the clearing. He began to understand the values that guided Naeli's life: respect for nature, patience in learning, and the importance of connection and community. He felt that he was not just learning new skills, but also becoming a better version of himself. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Naeli spoke softly. "You are no longer just a visitor," she said. "You are part of this life now. That is not a small thing. It means responsibility, care, and understanding. You have grown, and I am proud of what you have learned." John felt a warmth in his heart. He realized that their bond had grown beyond instruction and learning. It had become a partnership, a relationship built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. He admired Naeli not only for her skill and knowledge, but for her patience, kindness, and quiet strength. He understood that their connection was rare and valuable, and he felt grateful for the life they were building together. As night fell, they prepared for rest. John lay under the open sky, reflecting on the days that had passed. He felt a sense of peace and fulfillment he had never known. He had come a long way since the day he had entered Naeli's tent by mistake. What had seemed like a simple accident had turned into a journey of learning, growth, and connection. He understood that life with Naeli was not always easy, but it was meaningful, enriching, and full of discovery. Before sleep, Naeli spoke once more, her voice calm in the quiet night. "Tomorrow will bring more challenges, more lessons, and more opportunities to grow. Remember, life is not just about surviving. It is about understanding, respecting, and connecting. That is the path you are on now." John listened, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that he had grown in ways he could not have imagined, and that his life had been forever changed. He felt gratitude for Naeli's guidance, admiration for her wisdom, and a quiet excitement for the future. He closed his eyes, knowing that the bond between them was strong, and that together they could face whatever the days ahead might bring. The mornings in the clearing had begun to feel familiar to John, yet they were far from ordinary. Every sunrise brought a sense of purpose, discovery, and connection. The routines they had established, fetching water, tending the garden, preparing meals, and observing the land, were no longer simply tasks to complete. Each activity carried meaning, and John had come to understand that the lessons Naeli taught were about far more than survival. They were about life itself. One particular morning, the sun had barely begun to rise when Naeli invited John to walk with her to a small hill overlooking the clearing. The climb was gentle but required focus, and John followed carefully, noticing the delicate balance in each step. Naeli paused often, pointing out the small details: the way the wind moved through the grasses, the subtle tracks of animals, and the quiet patterns of the land that told stories to those who paid attention. John had grown accustomed to observing these things, but each time he felt amazed by the depth of knowledge hidden in the natural world. From the top of the hill, the clearing stretched out before them like a living tapestry. John looked at it with new eyes, seeing the harmony in the placement of the tent, the garden, and the small creek that meandered through the land. He realized how much they had accomplished together. What had begun as a simple act of survival had grown into a home, a partnership, and a shared life. Naeli stood beside him, calm and steady, her gaze taking in the land as if she were seeing it through both the past and the future. "You have learned much," Naeli said softly. "Not only the skills, but also the understanding. You are ready to take responsibility for this life, for this land, and for the bond we share. That is not an easy journey, but it is a rewarding one." John felt a swell of gratitude and respect. He realized how far he had come, from the man who had entered a tent by mistake to someone who could now navigate, care for, and understand this land and its traditions. He had grown not only in skill but in patience, observation, and awareness. More importantly, he had begun to understand the depth of connection that life with Naeli could offer. The day passed in quiet work and reflection. John helped repair the fences around the garden, practiced tending the small animals Naeli kept, and prepared meals together. Each task felt meaningful, and each moment spent working alongside her deepened the bond that had grown between them. John noticed how seamlessly their movements complemented one another. They no longer needed instructions or corrections for every small task. They anticipated each other, learned from each other, and respected each other's abilities. In the afternoon, they sat together by the creek. John skipped small stones across the water while Naeli wove a small basket from reeds. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the shared understanding of people who had spent time learning, observing, and living together. John thought about how much he had learned from Naeli, not just about the land and survival, but about respect, patience, and the value of connection. "You have changed," Naeli said suddenly, her voice gentle but certain. "You are no longer just a man who stumbled into my life. You are a part of it, and with that comes responsibility, not just for yourself but for this home, for the land, and for the bond we share." John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that life was not simply about tasks or routines. It was about understanding, caring, and growing alongside others. He looked at Naeli, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of certainty about the path he was on. He understood that their lives were intertwined, and that together they had created something rare and valuable. The following days were filled with a mix of work, exploration, and quiet reflection. John and Naeli traveled further into the hills, discovering new plants, observing wildlife, and learning from the land in ways that went beyond survival. John had begun to anticipate the lessons Naeli would offer, and she had begun to trust him with tasks that required careful judgment and responsibility. They laughed together, shared stories, and discovered a rhythm in their daily lives that was both comforting and fulfilling. One evening, as the sun set in vibrant shades of gold and crimson, they sat together outside the tent. The air was warm, the fire crackled gently, and the desert around them seemed to glow in the fading light. John reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the accidental entrance into a tent to the life he now shared with Naeli. The path had not been simple or easy, but it had been full of learning, growth, and meaningful connection. "You have become part of this life," Naeli said, breaking the silence. "And in doing so, you have shown that you are capable of more than you realized. That is what makes life rich and lasting, not ease, but learning, respect, and effort." John felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that Naeli's words applied to more than just the work they did each day. They applied to life, to relationships, and to the way people grow when they step outside their comfort zones. He felt gratitude for her patience, admiration for her wisdom, and pride in the progress he had made. As night fell, John and Naeli lay beneath the stars. The desert sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with twinkling lights and quiet beauty. John felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. He understood that life with Naeli was not only about surviving in the wilderness. It was about thriving, learning, and building a meaningful existence together. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. John and Naeli continued to work, explore, and learn together. Their bond deepened, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. They faced challenges, of course: harsh weather, difficult terrain, and the constant demands of caring for the land. But they faced them together, finding solutions and supporting one another. Over time, John began to see the subtle ways their partnership shaped their lives. He had become more observant, more patient, and more thoughtful. He noticed small details in the land and in Naomi's actions that he had once overlooked. He had learned not just practical skills, but also values: care for others, respect for tradition, and the quiet strength that comes from understanding and empathy. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, Naomi spoke softly. "You have grown," she said. "Not just in skill, but in understanding. You have learned what it means to live in harmony with this land and with those around you. That is a gift that few receive, and you have earned it." John felt a surge of emotion. He realized that her words were not just praise. They were acknowledgement of a journey they had taken together, a journey that had begun with a simple mistake and had blossomed into a shared life filled with learning, respect, and connection. By the time the seasons changed, John and Naomi had established a life that felt both strong and enduring. Their home in the clearing had become a sanctuary of balance, where work, learning, and companionship coexisted in harmony. They had discovered the joy of shared accomplishment, the comfort of trust, and the quiet satisfaction of living fully in the present. One evening, as the stars shone brightly above them, John reflected on the journey that had begun the day he had entered the tent by mistake. What had seemed like a simple accident had become a turning point, leading him to a life he could never have imagined. He realized that the lessons he had learned from Naomi, patience, respect, observation, and connection, were more valuable than any skill he had ever acquired on the ranch. Naomi sat beside him, her presence calm and reassuring. "Life brings us together in unexpected ways," she said. "Sometimes a mistake is the beginning of something wonderful. You have learned that, and now you live it." John nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He looked at Naomi, at the home they had built together, and at the land that had taught him so much. He understood that life's greatest lessons often came in unexpected forms, and that the bonds we build through respect, care, and understanding are the ones that last. As they settled for the night, John felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. He knew that their journey was ongoing, that each day would bring new challenges and opportunities to learn. But he also knew that together, he and Naomi could face anything, building a life that was rich, meaningful, and full of connection. And in that quiet desert clearing, under the endless sky, John realized that what had started as a simple mistake, the day he had entered Naomi's tent, had become the most important and rewarding chapter of his life. He had found not only a home, but a partner, a teacher, and a true companion for the journey ahead. The clearing was no longer just a place to live. It was a place of growth, trust, and harmony. And in that space, John and Naomi had discovered something far greater than survival: a shared life filled with respect, learning, and the quiet joy of being together.